And I'd invite anyone who is moved to join me in the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So once again, welcome. Happy spring. If you're following the cycle of Torah readings, happy book of Leviticus. So we begin Parshat Vayikra this morning, and delighted to share these moments of learning with you. My intention today is to pick up in the same daf, the same page of Talmud where we left off last week, tractate Berakhot, page 7a. Every daf or page of Talmud has an A side and a B side. That's just the way folios used to be printed. So that was the way in which pages of Talmud were classically designated and remain that way. We should be able to get through a good chunk of 7a on the subject of the suffering of the righteous. And then actually we're going to go backward, at least in terms of the way the Talmud is arranged, to Berakhot 5b, so just a couple pages prior, and continue to examine the subject, but through a different lens with a different set of rabbinic commentaries. I don't know how far we'll get into Berakhot 5b today. We might get all the way through the sugya that I'd like us to examine or not, but we may hit pause at the end of today's lesson so that we can make space for a standalone study a week from today. On the 30th of March, my intention will be to walk us through some Talmudic material on the observance of Pesach. So I thought that would be a nice thing to do, since Pesach begins on Wednesday night, April 5th. You can have a little bit of chomer lidrosh, we say, a material for unpacking in conversation at your Seder table based on the learning that we'll undertake a week from today. So we'll do like a little detour into Pesach customs, and then we'll come back after Pesach to learn some more about suffering. So that's the plan. So we've blessed already. We're still welcoming a few folks into the Zoom. Glad that we're all together. Hope in good health and spirits. And let's dive right in. So I want to bring up on screen a passage from Berakhot 7a that is just a few sections, a few little, the classical academic term is pericope. A pericope is a unit of text. So a few pericopes down the page. So we're skipping over a little bit of what I would call arcana about roosters. If you want to go back, you can scroll up and read about roosters. But this is the section we looked at last week about Balak, about God's anger. You might recall, just as a recap, God's anger was the subject, and the link between human suffering and when God is angry was where we concluded our discussion last time. Now, and then we got into this fun Talmudic discussion of, well, how long is a moment if God is angry? And we even tried to get numerically how long a moment is. Then there's this whole business about the color of a rooster at sunrise. So I'm going to skip over all of this and jump to here. So I've reformatted Sefaria. That wasn't very hard to do, by the way. There's a fun feature in Sefaria right here. This is the how would you like your text displayed button, this little letter A Aleph icon. If you click it, you can choose what language you'd like to look at, English, Hebrew English, or just Hebrew, whether you'd like your text big or small, whether you'd like your text vocalized or unvocalized, punctuated or unpunctuated, and how you'd like it displayed if bilingual. So I actually have selected a new way of looking at this, and I hope it won't confuse you. This will display the English text on the right, and side by side, the Hebrew text on the left. And that way we can actually look at both at the same time instead of scrolling up and down and up and down. I want to see how that goes. I'm going to put the vowels on, which makes it easier to read. There you go. And punctuation on, which also makes it easier to read. Of course, none of that is in the actual Talmud. The punctuation and vocalization is all secondary academic layer, but it makes it much easier to study. Okay, so here we are, and now you can look at the text side by side. So we begin here. Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Yossi. A very classic way of beginning, introducing a new idea from the Amoraim. Amar is your tip-off, the verb to speak or discuss. So Rabbi Yochanan discussed this matter in the name of Rabbi Yossi, his teacher. Shlosha devarim, so three things, shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, right, upon three things. So this is a classic rabbinic mnemonic. Those of you who've studied Pericope with me know how important the use of mnemonic devices are to the rabbis. Shlosha devarim, three things, bikesh Moshe milifnei hakadosh baruch hu. So Moses requested three things in the presence of the KBH. All right, Moses requested three things from the Holy One, blessed be God. Vinatan lo, and God granted them to him. God granted him. And again, in the English, in Sepharia, the bold-faced text is what is actually there in the Gemara, and the plain print is interpolated through the translation. In other words, it is helpful for you to know that this is what the translator believes is being conveyed, but the actual Gemara tends to be much more laconic, right? It leaves a lot more to interpretation and only says, three things did Moses request of God, and he granted him, meaning God granted those three things to Moses. So what are those three things that Moses requested of God? Bikesh, he requested, Shetishre Shechina al Yisrael, that the Shechina, the divine presence, would rest upon Israel, not the land, but the people. Israel is almost always a reference in our scripture and our classical texts to the people of Israel, meaning the Jews, so that the divine presence would rest upon the Jews, whatever that may mean. V'natanlo, and God granted it. Shene'emar, halo belechtecha imanu. The proof text here, shene'emar, as it is said, always introduces a proof text. And they give you the full quote, which is nice. Whereas the actual Gemara, sorry about that, only quotes in excerpt. So the Gemara only quotes three words from this scriptural verse, halo belechtecha imanu, which I would say, is it not in that you go with us? So the full verse is, for how can it be known that I have found grace in your sight, I and your people? So the setting here is right after the disaster of the golden calf. Okay, so the Israelites in Exodus chapter 32 are cavorting around the golden calf that they have kind of pressed Aaron to fashion for them. He takes their gold, he melts it down, he makes this graven or this molten image. They cavort and frolic around the golden calf. Moses is alerted to some kind of balagan, some kind of chaos happening at the foot of the mountain. He goes down, he's enraged, he shatters the tablets. He goes back up the mountain, and he has to intercede on behalf of the Israelites who have gone astray with God, who is ready to wipe them all out. God says, I'll just get rid of all of the Jews, and I'll start over with just you, Moses, and we'll create a whole new community. And Moses says, hang on, That's not really how this is supposed to go. What will the Egyptians say? What will other people say if they know that you brought us out into the wilderness just to destroy us? And then this beautiful poetic plea for mercy. How can it be known that I have found grace in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in that you go with us so that we are distinguished, I and your people, from all the people that are on the face of the earth? In other words, wait a minute, God, don't forget, there's a bigger picture here. There's a mission. You've charged us with being a light unto the nations and a holy people. We need to fulfill that mission. You need to actually be with us. This is no time to depart. This is no time to abandon this project. Stay. Right? So this is part of Moses's beautiful poetic plea and intercession for forgiveness on behalf of the Israelites. And this one little miniature phrase of 3 words here in Hebrew, halo belechtecha imanu, is it not by your going with us? Lechtecha, from sounds like lech lecha. It's the same root, lech, which means to walk or go. Techa means you're going in the gerund form of the verb. So is it not halo belechtecha, by your going, imanu, with us? Is it not by your going with us that we will attain our holy purpose of being a light unto the nations, distinguished I and your people from all the people that are on the face of the earth? So in other words, and the translator gives us more or less what I've been trying to say. The request is it not in that you go with us refers to the resting of the divine presence upon Israel. So that's request number 1. Moses says, we need God to be present in our midst. Any questions thus far? Okay. Just want to, because the text does get a little bit woolly, and I want to make sure that at least from the pshat level, pshat meaning the simplest, the plain sense of the text, that I'm being clear in unpacking it with us. Okay, so that's request number 1. But remember, the rabbi here, who's this rabbi? Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yosef, says there are 3 requests. The first is that God's presence rest upon the Jewish people. How do we know that that request was made? From verse Exodus chapter 33:16. Okay. Now, the second request. Bikesh shelo tishre shechina al ovdei kochavim. Not a great translation here. Moses requested that the divine presence not rest upon the nations of the world. Well, nations of the world is an idiomatic translation or a euphemistic translation. What it really says is shelo tishre shechina, that the shechina, or God's immanent presence. When I say immanent, I'm spelling it with an A in the middle of the word. I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T. Immanent with an A means proximate in physical space. Immanent with an I in the middle, I-M-M-I-N-E-N-T, means proximate in time, right? A rainstorm, says the meteorologist, is imminent with an I. All right, but I don't know. Immanent with an A is a little bit more of a highfalutin term that theologians love to use. The immanent presence of God means that which usually theologians talk about 2 ways in which God is portrayed, depicted, and even experienced in religious life. There is the immanent with an A, which means close, intimate is a good approximation of that word. The God who is near. And then there's the transcendent aspect of God, the God that is above all or distant, right? So the God who created the universe is a transcendent God. The God who speaks in the murmurings of the heart is an immanent God with an A. That's these 2 dimensions. Now, in this case, Moses requested that the Shekhinah, which is the immanent aspect of God, that aspect of God that can dwell near to the people, can be felt, understood in the heart, and not usually associated with, for instance, the human experience of awe or majesty, but rather with love, closeness, protection, both of these dimensions come into play throughout Jewish life. Jewish prayer, I think, gets at both the immanent and the transcendent aspects of God. And now you have some new language for paying attention to Shabbat service or a High Holy Day service, and discuss amongst yourselves, or you're just within yourself, is this image, metaphor, verse, poem depicting a God who is immanent, transcendent, or both? When we talk about the immanent God, we sometimes use the term Shekhinah, which comes from a root meaning to dwell or even to be neighborly. It is the same root, by the way, Shekhinah, as the word Mishkan, which means a sanctuary. The Mishkan is the tent that the Israelites are instructed to build in the wilderness, where the presence of God, the Shekhinah, will be manifest. Contained is the wrong word, because it doesn't contain the presence of God, but it becomes a kind of a holding place for, or a meeting place for the immanent presence of God. It's also the root of the word for the word neighbor, which is a shechen, or a neighborhood is a shechunah. So something that means near, right? Dwelling near. So Moses requested that this indwelling or immanent presence of God not rest upon not the nations of the world as is translated here, so much as the Hebrew phrase, which is much juicier, Ovdei Kochavim. Ovdei Kochavim are literally those who worship the stars, idol worshippers, idolaters, which is a stand-in. Ovdei Kochavim, sometimes also the full expression is Ovdei Kochavim u'mazalot, which literally means those who worship the stars and the planets. A mazal, as in mazal tov, is literally a planet or constellation. So mazal tov means good planet. It's astrological in nature. When you wish someone mazal tov, you are literally praying that they experience the blessing of being born under a good star, good planet, good constellation. Ovdei Kochavim u'mazalot is a rabbinic stand-in. It's often condensed to its acronym Akum. Akum, Ovdei Kochavim u'mazalot. Akum means idolaters generally. So those who worship the stars and the planets. Moses requested that idolaters not experience the immanent presence of God. So it's simply the inverse of the previous request, right? Dear God, please dwell upon or among the Jewish people. Second request, God, please do not dwell among the idolaters, anyone else, anyone who's not. Maybe Gentiles would be the largest category, but I think that it's more accurate to say among the non-believers. V'natanlo, and God granted this request. Shenemar, as it is written, or as it is said, v'niflinu ani, I can't read it, v'amacha, so that we would be distinguished, I and your people, from all the people on the face of the earth. So remember, we're going back to the same verse, but now we're quoting from the last clause. The first clause was, God, may you walk with us. Or is it not you, by your walking with us, that we will be distinguished among all the peoples of the earth? So what is important about the second request, it's not only that Moses is asking God to be immanently present among the Jewish people, it is also that God is asked to be immanently and uniquely present among the Jewish people, not with the other nations of the world. So Moses is requesting a unique status for the Jewish people, a unique relationship, or a unique proximity to the divine. Okay, so now we've got two requests. Judy.
Something very interesting that I was looking up this Rabbi Avi Kilip, who you know from Hadar, and there's a text that she was working on, which was comparing a very contemporary issue to the Talmud and the idea that idolatry is such a sin that it could be a modern contemporary version of anti-racism, which is something that you have to truly live with it to be truly anti-racist. And she said that was the seriousness of idolatry. It has to be in your bones. It is so bad. It's such a serious sin that it has to live. It's part of who you are. And comparing that to the contemporary anti-racism was fascinating to me.
That's very cool. Thanks for sharing that. Avi Kilip, Rabbi Avi Kilip, she's awesome. I got to study with her last week at Hadar, my Talmud study intensive for a few days in New York. Very, very talented rabbi. Thanks, Judy. Okay, so now we've got two requests. Cause the divine presence to go with the Jewish people. Do not cause the divine presence to rest upon the idolatrous nations. Let's unpack this further through the two questions. I see hands raised from first Audrey and then Barbara. Kindly unmute yourself and then you can comment.
Okay, I'm a little confused. First of all, I'm struck by if Mazel means the planets and you're saying Mazel Tov, and that's for idolaters?
Yeah, it is a little bit funny, right? That Mazal Tov, which we just take for granted is the Jewish way of saying congratulations, literally means a good planet. So, yeah, I know. Kind of live with the paradox with that, I suppose.
Okay.
Judaism, like any other civilization, did not grow up in a vacuum. It was part of the rabbinic Judaism grows up, as we've talked about this, including last week at some length, grows up in the Greco-Roman diaspora. And so I think we even did, was it last week or 2 weeks ago that we did kind of a deep dive into, oh no, sorry, I'm confusing this with where I was with Hadar. I was like, wait, I did a long study on Jewish astrology from the end of Tractate Shabbat. Okay, so the Talmud, Talmudic Babylonian Talmud Tractate Shabbat, which is, as you would surmise from the title, the tractate about Shabbat, concludes with a fascinating discussion. I'll look forward to teaching it at some point. It's a long discussion about a single phrase. The phrase is a rabbi who contends, Ein Mazal Yisrael, which literally means, well, it means a number of things. It's a very complex phrase considering it's only 3 words. Ein Mazal Yisrael literally means Israel has no mazel, or the Jews have no mazel. Now, right, that could be simply an acknowledgement of it's tough to be a Jew. Jews have no mazel, right? Why is the only luck that our people has seemingly bad luck? That's one way of looking at it, right? You know the definition of a Jewish telegram, correct?
No.
Start worrying, stop, details to follow. So yeah, it was funnier when people knew what a telegram was, but okay.
I know. My father.
Right, yeah. I can't tell that joke to kids because they're like, what's a telegram? Right, all right. Start worrying, details to follow. Says a lot about the character of the Jewish people. But Ein Mazal Yisrael is actually a much deeper discussion than just, oh, we're the people without a lot of mazel. It literally means astrology does not apply to the Jewish people, right? So, and there's a whole discussion about that. There's a whole camp of rabbis who actually say, no, the stars and planets under which you are born determine your character and your fate. And it's a fascinating thing. They're like, if you're born on a Sunday, you will exhibit these attributes. I think that like if you're born at nighttime, you will be sneaky and able to get away with crimes. If you're born during the daylight, you won't be able to keep secrets. Like it has all this, it's a fascinating conversation. And then there are a bunch of rabbis who say, Ein Mazal Yisrael, like, why are you giving us all of this astrological, nourishkeit? It's garnished. This is nonsense. This is meaningless. And so there's a debate among the rabbis, Ein Mazal Yisrael or Yesh Mazal Yisrael? Is Israel is the Jewish people subject to astrological influence? Or do we regard this as garnished, meaningless, nonsense.
Don't Hasids incorporate some of that? I mean, some of them have shown me things like the number of stars on a dollar bill and things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's not just Hasidic Jews. So yes, and remember, again, I keep saying remember as if I've told you this before. I'm sorry, I'm teaching so many different things to different people these days. I don't remember with whom I've learned or said something, but Hasidism is an offshoot of original Kabbalistic Judaism, or it's deeply indebted. So in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, there are all sorts of rabbit holes down which one can go that get into astrology and star maps and all sorts of strange symbology, because mysticism, that is to say, mysticism is the religious pursuit of the immanent experience of God, immanent with an A. I'm going to try and tie this all together, right?
That makes sense.
Whereas prayer is often about acknowledging the transcendent majesty of God.
Right. Okay.
Mysticism is any religious pursuit about attaining an immanent experience of God. It is the George Harrison version of religion. Okay, George Harrison is often called the mystic of the mystical Beatle. Each of the Beatles has like a different kind of like stereotyped identity, right? George Harrison, probably my favorite of the Beatles, may peace be upon him. When he went solo in 1970 and released his 3-album magnum opus, All Things Must Pass, the first song, My Sweet Lord, I really want to know you, I really want to see you, I really want to be with you, my Lord. That is mysticism, and that is the immanent God, right? I really want to know you, see you, feel you, be with you. That's Shekhinah. Okay? Hasidism is deeply indebted to this strain of Jewish thought and practice. Okay. So, and with that, yes, there are times when you can go down these rabbit holes, because I'd say it this way: there's a very fine line between mysticism and the occult. And often in the Venn diagram of mystical practice, the occult is often overlapping in various ways, right? Sometimes it's very hard to determine what ought to be kind of religious experience and wisdom for the masses, and what is considered to be so dangerous or transgressive that we would relegate it to the realm of what we call the occult, outside the cult. Okay. Barbara.
I always thought that the Shekhinah was the female side of God.
Also, yeah. Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is deeply into God and the different aspects of the divine that can be assigned analogous qualities to human gender. All right, so again, Kabbalah is a very deep, elaborate symbology and vocabulary for talking about the divine and approaching the divine and actually having the immanent experience of the divine. And yes, Shekhinah is equated to, equivalent with, associated with that aspect of the divine which is feminine. When mapped on the human body, Shekhinah corresponds often to the womb. So if you ever want to do a deep dive into Kabbalah, that's a long-form course that I will have to spend years preparing. But it has been at the heart of what I've been studying for the last 3 years.
But the attributes that you're describing seem to be more of a feminine.
Right. Well, classically depicted, right. The immanent God is often also depicted in language and symbology vocabulary that is feminine. And the transcendent God is often depicted in language that is masculine. Right. So a God that is transcendent is associated with might and power and awe. And the feminine God, the feminine aspects of God, are associated with nurturing, proximity, love, closeness. And that's okay. Unfair to the people I know who are very affectionate, very present fathers. We have a few stay-at-home dads in our community, but Judaism is a patriarchal religion that emerges from a patriarchal society. So it's not surprising that the qualities of traditional masculinity are associated with God. But the part of the genius of Kabbalah is the way in which both are acknowledged, right? God has both masculine and feminine. And in fact, part of the Kabbalistic enterprise is the unification of these disparate attributes of the divine. Often that union or unification is depicted in sexualized terms, right? So the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect, is part of the goal of mystical practice, of Kabbalistic practice in Judaism, is to unify the masculine and feminine aspects. And when you do that, there's this like divine effluence. It is, metaphorically speaking, kind of orgasmic, right? Bringing together the masculine and the feminine aspects of God is depicted in terms that are analogous to sexual congress. And the sexual union between human beings of masculine and feminine. Judaism is not just patriarchal, it's also heteronormative. Classical Judaism is really opposed to homosexual sex, but that's another rabbit hole we won't go down. That the union of the masculine and the feminine in Kabbalah is the way in which divine energy can flow into the cosmos. Right. Okay. Thanks, Barbara. Norm.
One of the words that you were translating was close to oved, which means servant, but you didn't translate it that way.
Correct. Because oved, which means servant, also means slave, also means worshiper. Which is why we call them services, right? Friday night services. We call worship service. It also means work. It also just means a worker is an oved. It's a very layered word in Jewish tradition. Right? In fact, eved means a slave, so it's the same root. Oved means a worshiper, but it's exactly the same letters with different vocalization. The prayer we will sing at the beginning of the Magid section of the Pesach observance is Avadim Hayinu. Avadim Hayinu, which means we were slaves. But it's the same root. You hear it, Avadim. We were slaves. We were servants to Pharaoh. Ata b'nei chorin. Now we are free people. But we're not just free willy-nilly to do whatever we want, because that's anarchy, which is its own form of idolatry. We move from becoming Avadim leFaro, slaves to Pharaoh, to Ovdim Lashem, right? Ovdei or Ovdei Adonai, servants of God, those who worship God. Akum, Ovdei Kochavimu Mazalot, those who worship the stars and the planets, broadly speaking, are just categorized as idolaters. But yes, you're correct on the literal translation. Okay, so back to the text. We've only gotten 2 requests. So far, Moses says, let your Shekhinah rest upon the Jews. Let your Shekhinah not rest upon the idolaters, the other nations. Okay, the third. Now, this is where the conversation actually gets spicy. Bikesh lehodio drachav shel hakadosh baruch hu. And finally, Moses requested to know, or to let it be known, drachav shel hakadosh baruch hu, the derech, the ways, or derachim, plural, of the Holy One of Blessing. V'natan lo. So in other words, dear God, let me know your ways. I want to understand the divine nature. By the way, now that we've had this like mini mester in the last 15 minutes on Jewish mysticism, on Kabbalah, it won't surprise you to learn that this encounter between God and Moses on Mount Sinai, after the transgression of the golden calf, before the carving of the second set of tablets and the reconstitution of the covenant between God and the people, the forgiveness, is a paradigmatic text for 2 things. One, it's a paradigmatic text for Yom Kippur. And many people say that the day that Moses came down from the mountain the second time was the Day of Atonement, to signal that forgiveness had been granted. And it is a paradigmatic text for Kabbalah, right? The text where Moses is in this intimate encounter with God saying, show me your ways. I want to know how you work, God. Or George Harrison, I really want to know you, right? And God granted the request according to the Talmud. Reading on, Shene'emar, as it is said, show me your ways and I will know you. So from the same passage, just a few verses earlier, Exodus 33:13. Hodi'eni na et drachecha. And then if you click here, remember Sefaria has this wonderful way of calling up texts and letting you see multiple things at once. So Exodus 33:13. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. That's the setup. Okay? So I really want to know you, my Lord, my sweet Lord. That's what's happening here. So it's a mystical encounter. It's Moses wanting to have an experience of the divine that is immanent with an A. And the text goes on elaborating on this theme. Amar lefanav, Moses said in God's presence, or Moses said before God, Ribono shel olam, another epithet, classical way of referring to God, master of all the worlds, master of the world. Mipnei ma yesh tzadik v'tov lo, v'yesh tzadik v'ra lo, yesh rasha v'tov lo, v'yesh rasha v'ra lo. So Moses is asking, dear God, what's the deal? Mipnei ma, why, or what's the deal? Mipnei ma yesh tzadik v'tov lo, that you can have a righteous person, you can have a tzaddik, and it all goes well for him. This is easy Hebrew, my friends, not hard. Yesh tzadik v'tov lo. Literally, there's a righteous guy, and it's good for him, right? A righteous man can experience the good, or it goes well for him. V'yesh tzadik v'ra lo, but also you can have a righteous guy or gal, but you can have a tzaddik, and it goes badly for him. So how is it that you can have somebody who is righteous who experiences the good and receives the good, but also you can have a righteous person who experiences the bad? So Moses is asking if not the core conundrum question of the religious enterprise. What's the deal with the apparent inequity of suffering and unfairness of suffering? How can you have a righteous person, one righteous person over here who experiences good, and an equally righteous person over there who experiences bad? And then he goes on to give the inverse of this idea. Yesh rasha v'tov lo. You can have a wicked person and it goes well for him. The yesh rasha v'ra lo. And on the other hand, you can have a wicked person and it goes badly for him. And then finally, he says, Amarlo, Moshe, God responds, with respect, well, let's read it in English here. So Moses says, show me your ways and I will know you. Moses said before God, so what does show me your ways mean? Which is fascinating, right? That's a very open-ended phrase, show me your ways. Well, what does that mean? Here's what the Talmud says it means. Moses was really asking God, Master of the universe, why is it that the righteous prosper, the righteous suffer, the wicked prosper, the wicked suffer? This is God's answer. Okay, so looking here, Moshe, Tzadik v'tov lo, dear Moses, if you have a righteous person and it goes well for him, Tzadik ben Tzadik. All right, that's because, what happened here? See, this is the one thing I don't like about Sefaria is that it's hard to highlight a section because it calls something else up. Okay, there we are. Tzadik ben Tzadik. Moses, the righteous person who prospers, is a righteous person, the son of a righteous person. So this is the explanation. Don't try and sit with it whether you like it or not. Full disclosure, I don't like it, but that's not the point. I'm not here to teach you what we like. I'm here to teach you Talmud. Okay, so a righteous person who prospers, a righteous person where it goes well for him, it is because he is righteous and he is descended from the righteous. In other words, we are dealing with a category of religious experience in Judaism known as zechut avot, or if you want to be gender sensitive, zechut avot v'imahot. Zechut means merit, avot, fathers, ancestors, avot v'imahot, patriarchs and matriarchs, or one's parents. In other words, the notion of zechut avot is that God favors us not because we ourselves have done anything to merit divine favor, but because our ancestors earned it for us. Now, this category of religious experience in Judaism is expressed in the Avot V'Imachot prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, right? Blessed are you, Adonai, God of our forefathers, we say in Reform Judaism, and our foremothers. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov. We add Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, the God of all the matriarchs and patriarchs. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon, big, mighty, awesome God. Okay. Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, the one who bestows Chasadim Tovim, all kinds of loving kindness. Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, and who's responsible for all things. V'Zocher Chastei Avot ve'Imachot, and who remembers the merit or the goodness of the Avot v'Imachot, your ancestors. Umevi Geula Livnei v'Neihem, and who brings about redemptive power, redemptive possibility, Livnei v'Neihem, for their children's children, for all of their progeny down the generations. Lema'an shemo b'ahava, for the sake of God's name, lovingly. Melech ozeru moshio magen, the God who helps and saves and delivers, and who protects us. It's very hard to do this way. I have the prayer, memorized, but I'm not used to breaking it into Melech ozeru moshio magen, Baruch atah Adonai magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah. Right? The blessed is the God, the shield of Abraham, the defender of Sarah. All right. The point of the prayer is, God, be merciful and kind to us, not for our own sake, but because of the merit of our ancestors. We are not worthy. We are not personally deserving of divine favor, but they were, and we're their descendants. So for their sake, and for the sake of your name, for the sake of your reputation, God, we ask your divine favor on us. That's Zechut Avot. You've been davening that for a long time. If you come to Friday night services, if you knew the prayer I was just breaking down and trying to chant badly in verse by verse format and translating, Avot V'Imachot is Zechut Avot. It's the prayer about divine favor upon us, not for our own sake, but for the sake of our ancestors. So that's what's being conveyed here now through a theological frame. Namely, if a righteous person prospers, it's not because he himself is righteous, but because he is righteous and he is descended from the righteous. Judy Gross asks in the chat window, is this a kind of caste system? I'm not sure that is a wonderful or the best possible approximation. Only for two reasons. One, I don't know enough about caste, as I think you're using it in classical, for instance, Hinduism, or other Southeast Asian traditions, culture, religion, what have you. So I don't know enough about, are the upper castes in society viewed as receiving divine favor? Okay. Arlene, do you want to ask your question?
It's not a question. I just feel that we're still very much dealing with the same issues that Job dealt with. Why me? Why me? And there is no answer. There is no answer as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's the answer that the book of Job provides, but it's more than just there is no answer. I mean, the book of Job asks the question, why me? Why am I? And the book of Job incontrovertibly proposes that Job is righteous. All right, that's the core claim of the book of Job, is that a righteous person is suffering. Job's righteousness is never called into question. His friends say, so-called friends, who come to so-called comfort him, say, well, Job, if you are suffering, that constitutes like prima facie evidence that you did something bad. You may not know what it is, but you must have done something wrong. And Job protests. He says, no, I demand an answer from God directly because that's not the deal. I've done nothing wrong. Not only that, I'm the most pious. The answer that the book of Job gives is not so much there is no answer. And this is subtle, but I think it's important. The answer that God gives finally when God shows up in chapter 38 is, what do you know? What do you know about how I work? That's different from there is no answer. The answer is, don't ask a question of God that you may not like the answer to. And by the way, you're not really the center of my universe. The last two chapters of the book of Job, God, comes out of the whirlwind and basically says, where were you when I made the world? What do you know about how the world works? So I think God is saying the universe is not calibrated to human notions of fairness. That's my phrase. Okay, let's read on. So what is proposed here is God saying to Moses, here's the explanation. If a righteous person prospers, it's because his ancestors were righteous, or he's a tzaddik ben tzaddik, right? He's righteous, son of a righteous. Tzaddik veralo, the next phrase, if you have a righteous, oh gosh, annoying. Sorry, what just happened here? Oh, we're in Exodus. Okay, that's why. I'm sorry. All right. Tzaddik veralo, you have a righteous person and it goes badly for him. Tzaddik ben rasha. The explanation is he might be a righteous person, but he's the son of a bad person. And so he has stored up demerit. And that's why he's suffering. And by the way, there is something to be said for the fact that, trauma and abuse and transgression can have generationally transmitted consequences. People who grow up in homes with bad parents, abusive parents, often have a much harder climb through life because they come into the world with all sorts of built-in disadvantages. So maybe what's being proposed here actually does have some grounding in psychological theory and family systems theory as well. Or maybe this is just a theological workaround for how can you possibly explain a good person who suffers? Well, he must be a good person, but his dad was not, mom was not. Tzaddik ben rasha. Rasha v'tovlo. You have a wicked person and it's going well for him. Rasha ben tzaddik. He's able to derive benefit from his good parents. So if you have a no goodnik, but his father or parent was good, that explains how a wicked person can prosper. Rasha veralo. And in the case of a wicked person who suffers, rasha ben rasha. He's eating the consequences of what was sown by his parents. Again, I don't ask that you like this, but you can see the rabbis working through the theological conundrum and saying, yeah, how is it that a righteous person can suffer and a wicked person can prosper? It has to do with zechut avot. There are things that come to us that indicate or determine our path in life, our fate in life, that were established for us by our parents and don't have to do with our personal merit or demerit. Michelle and Norm, you can unmute and comment next, please.
But there appears to be an inconsistency between Job and this theory, because Job doesn't get any explanation. Oh, your parents were bad.
Indeed. Yes. So, Job is, in some ways, Job is the most radical text of the Torah in that it is the most confrontational or polemical text about other things that the Torah says. The book of Deuteronomy is the classic case study for a God who distributes measure for measure justice. You follow God's covenant, you'll be rewarded. You stray, you'll be punished. And that's that. And Job says that is not that. And even rabbinic theology, or more accurately, I should talk about rabbinic theologies, plural, because there's not just one. Even in this one book of the Talmud, tractate Berakhot, we're going to see lots of different proposals on the meaning of suffering. Even rabbinic theology, I would argue, is not as radically polemical as Job is, the book of Job. It is possible that even though rabbinic theology is many centuries removed, many centuries later, it doesn't necessarily represent a direct intellectual or theological heritage, right? This rabbinic theology, as you correctly point out, Norm, is not particularly indebted to what the book of Job proposes about the nature of suffering and the nature of God. They are disparate. And I'm not sure, what's that?
I was gonna say it's not just Job, because aren't some of the Psalms attributed to the son of Kohelet? And Kohelet, of course, is not Kohelet, I'm sorry. Korach. That's the K. Korach is one of our, not for the sake of heaven, quintessence of that.
Absolutely. The classic one, and interestingly, I studied this text at Hadar last week, is Psalm 44. Read it if you're interested in being depressed. It is a withering tirade. It is angry, and it's angry at God. It is the angriest of all the Psalms. And it basically says, I don't know why we are suffering. And it's a psalm that appears to be a response to national disaster, major catastrophe, conquest by a foreign empire, possibly. And it's like, I don't know why you're doing this, God, but we don't deserve it. So it's Jobian in its outlook, though that doesn't necessarily mean that the texts were in dialogue with each other. Job is often regarded as a wisdom literature that was deeply influenced by Greek philosophy, actually. So it's a curious book, and I think that in all of the books of the Tanakh, all the books of the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, it is sui generis. Job is different in its construction, its linguistics, its theme, and its theology from all other books of the Bible. Which begs the question, what was on the minds of the redactors who saw fit to include it in the scripture, in the canonized Hebrew Bible? But that's a question of canon criticism. The canon criticism entertains the question of why does something end up in the Bible and not something else? Okay, Steve Maskett. Oh, you disappeared, Steve. Maybe you're speaking with your mic.
I'm sorry. I found this to be a fascinating threading of the needle, fine line, because in the one hand, being righteous somehow is still given some importance, but being tzaddik or ra is totally disconnected from the effects of good and bad. And if I'm recalling correctly, this is the Amoraim, it's early, which is probably around the time when they were struggling with this stuff, and basically came to the conclusion that the rewards were in the Olam Haba as opposed to right here and now.
Yeah, that's another thought that the rabbis broadly, the rabbinic community, entertains. Amoraim, by the way, not so early. Tanaim, Mishnah is earliest.
Yeah, okay.
Amoraim, 4th century on. But even still, contemporaneous or indebted to earlier rabbinic thought that if God's justice cannot be visible to human beings or the Jew on earth, if it appears on earth as if the way things go is highly unjust in that the righteous suffer, the wicked prosper, then the only rectification must be what awaits us in the Olam Haba.
Yeah, but basically they're acknowledging that it's disconnected from some response to other than very, very broadly.
Correct. Great. It doesn't correlate with how you live your life, at least not one-to-one. Jessica, unmute, please.
I'm surprised that righteousness or spirituality, or I don't want to say it wrong, but we were talking about the closeness that you have with God in your heart. Immanence is inherited, like that you would other, more tangible goods. That it's something you, not through any of your own doing, that come, that you inherit, whether it's money or this righteousness and goodness, the merit. I'm really surprised that it's kind of the son or the daughter not being responsible for the father or mother's sins, but benefiting nonetheless.
Yeah, wonderful observation. I always like it when people raise a point of discomfort with the text, and that's what this is, right? So the irony of a conversation about zechut avot, the merit or demerit of your ancestors, of your parents, influencing your fortune or fate in the world, is highly discordant with the larger context here of Moses, who is asking to have this intimate experience of God, right? So if you look at that wider context of the imminent experience of God, which is exactly about the personal encounter, right? There's no such thing as an imminent experience of God that flows through the merit of one's ancestors or the demerit of one's ancestors. So there's a strong disconnect there in the subject matters that we're looking at today. Appreciate that observation, but live with the discomfort because I don't have a way of getting around it or apologizing for it. Okay, mom and dad's Zoom room, please.
Echoing around in my brain is a prayer that we sing in front of the Ark on the high holidays.
Yes.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Hanum.
Yes.
Where we conveniently forget the second half of the prayer.
Right. Okay. So that's actually the context for the verses that we're looking at in the book of Exodus, right? If I go back to the proof text here, Exodus 33:13, and I click on it, and okay, so now we have in the sidebar, I think everyone can see the sidebar, right? This is Moses up on Mount Sinai. And look at this, the direct expression of an imminent encounter. Adonai would speak to Moses face to face as one person speaks to another. Only Moses, though. Moses is often, or at least once or twice, referred to as the only person who had that kind of an imminent encounter with the divine. And then he would return to the camp, but his attendant, even Joshua, his successor, now his attendant, not yet designated as his successor, would not stir out of the tent. So Joshua didn't have that kind of imminent proximity to God. But let's see what happens. Now, if Moses says to Adonai, see, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you've not made known to me whom you will send with me. Moses is like, I need help. Leading the Jewish people is a very difficult job. I can relate. Leading the Jewish people is a very difficult job. All right, further, I need help. I can't do this alone. Further, you have said, God, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. So if I've truly gained your favor, pray, let me know your ways. That's the passage we're discussing. That's the imminent encounter that Jessica's referring back to. That I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. You can't abandon us now. And God said, I will go in the lead and I will lighten your burden. Vayomer panai elechu. Literally, my face will walk. My face will walk out front, or my face will walk. V'hanichotilach, and it will be literally you will rest, or you will have an encampment. But here it means I will make it easier for you. This will alleviate your distress. And Moses presses the matter. He says, unless you go in the lead, don't make us leave this place. We're not ready to move on from Sinai until I have some kind of concrete guarantee, God, that you're going to be with us. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth? So that's the long pericope section of Torah that the Talmud is commenting on here today. And Adonai said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. Now, here's where the crux is. And Moses is still not done with this demand, request to know God intimately. Oh, let me behold your presence. Vayomar har'eni na et kavodecha. Literally, show me your kavod. Some say your glory, your might, your presence, but this is George Harrison, right? I really want to know you. I want to see you. Let me see the divine. And God says, Ani a'avir kol tuvi al panecha v'karati v'shem Adonai lefanecha v'chanoti et asher achon v'richamti et asher arachem. I will, and God's actually saying, no, I can't let you see and know me in that intimate way, but I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Adonai and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show, but you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. And Adonai continued, see, there's a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will shield you with my hand until I have passed by. So that's what God is proposing. He said, okay, Moses, you're going to stand over there, and I'm going to pass by you, but backwards, as it were. You won't actually see me. You're facing the mountain, and I'm passing by you. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. And God says to Moses, now carve 2 tablets of stone, etc., and so forth. Moses carves the 2 tablets, and Adonai comes down in a cloud. This is the moment, Dad, that you were remembering correctly from the High Holiday Liturgy, and stood with Moses there, proclaiming the name Adonai. Adonai passed before Moses and proclaimed, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, here it is, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet. We sing this when we take the Torah out of the ark on the holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shavuot, Pesach. On the festivals and the high holy days, we declare this is the way in which human beings, or the Jew, comes to know the essence of God, through God's attributes. Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, notzer chesed la'alafim, nosei avon v'fesha v'chata'a v'nakeh, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Now, in the prayer book, that's where the passage ends. Remitting or forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, period. But in the Torah, there's a comma there, not a period. It goes on to say, yet not remitting, meaning all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generations. The big picture is that when God finally consents to Moses's plea and says, okay, look, you can't see my face in that up close, intimate way that you're asking, but I can let you experience something immanent and intimate about my essence, my divine essence. And the divine essence is compassion, patience, long-tempered, mercy, and forgiving of people's transgression, which is important because the context here is the people have committed their signature transgression. They built the golden calf. God is ready to abandon them entirely. Moses earns the forgiveness, carves the 2nd tablet, says, I need to have your assurance that you're going before us. And even more importantly, show me who you are. Show me your essence, O God. And God says, I can come close. You can see my back. And I'll pass these attributes before you. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, a God abounding in compassion and forgiveness and grace and love. But the Torah says, bad deeds have bad consequences down 3 or 4 generations. But it's a comparative statement because if you're good, the goodness will last after you for 1,000 generations. So God is merciful to the 1,000th generation with the righteous, but for the wicked, God holds you accountable for 3 or even 4 generations. That's the actual text, but the rabbis selectively edit out the business about the 3rd and 4th generation, just say God remits all punishment. And that's what we say right before we take the Torah out on the high holidays and the festivals. That's the God we invoke. The God of mercy, compassion, long-tempered, patient, loving, and true, forgiving iniquity, transgression, sin, etc., and so forth. Okay, so Dad, you remembered 100% correctly. It is not just, tangentially related to today's conversation. It's at the heart of today's conversation, textually and theologically. Great, Alan.
So it's not really punam to punam that Moses wanted.
Right.
But this is the point where when Moses came off the mountain, he had rays of light coming from him.
Yeah, that's what the Torah tells us next. And that he's all aglow. So he's had clearly some kind of transformative mystical encounter. He's had what George Harrison wanted from God. He's had that up close, and he's transformed by it.
A Hari Rama moment.
A what moment?
Hari Rama.
A Hari Rama moment, exactly, right? Eastern spirituality leans into its mystical dimension, like Kabbalah does. Mom and Dad, one more comment, and then we'll go back to the text.
The rays emanating from Moses's brow were misinterpreted by Michelangelo in the famous sculpture of
Yes.
Moses in, I forget which site it's in Rome, but he actually interpreted as having horns.
Yeah, because it's like
his head.
Karen, or a beam of light or a ray of light is also mistranslated as a horn. That's not, it never meant horns, but that image is where you get Jews with horns, unfortunately. Okay, let's read on. Which, by the way, is a wonderful name of the debut album by the Klezmatics. A wonderful klezmer band. Their first album is called Jews with Horns. It's pretty funny. Okay, back to Berakhot. So where are we here? Hang on. Okay, closing out Exodus. Oopsie. All right, so we're back to this section. So the Gemara resolves the contradiction. Oh, nope, we're not there yet. The Gemara expands upon these righteous and wicked individuals. It doesn't actually say that in the Gemara. That is your translator jumping in to get you back on track here. Amar Mar, a guy who's just goes by Mar, which means the master. I'm looking to click on it to get his bio. I'm not getting it. I'm sorry. Amar Mar. Sadiq ben Sadiq, the righteous person who prospers is a righteous person, the son of a righteous person. The righteous person who suffers is a righteous person, the son of a wicked person. We've read that before. So we're just repeating what we already have learned. The Gemara asks, is it so that one is always punished for his ancestors' transgressions? Is this always true? Does it have to be that way? Isn't it written, God visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children's children, unto the 3rd and 4th generations? But it is written elsewhere, fathers shall not die for their children, and children shall not be put to death for the fathers. In other words, no, Deuteronomy says, wait a minute. You will not suffer for the transgressions of an ancestor. That's not how it should or does work. Every man shall die for his own transgression. That's actually in the verse, Deuteronomy 24:16. All right, so we've got these two different verses. One says that there is a kind of familial collective punishment. If a person transgresses, the effect of that transgression, the divine punishment that might accompany it or does accompany it, might extend all the way down 3 or 4 generations. That's the text we just looked at from Exodus. But it is written elsewhere, we don't believe in collective punishment. Parents should not suffer for having a mamzer who, not a literal mamzer, not an illegitimate child, but a kid who's a real bastard, a kid who's a no-goodnik. nor should children suffer for the crimes and transgressions of their parents. So, what's happening here? The Gemara raises a contradiction between the two verses. In other words, and the text for that just says, V'ramenan kra'e achadade, rather. V'ramenan kra'e ahadade. You can tell my Aramaic is not as good. In other words, these two appear to contradict each other. The Gemara is acknowledging you've got two different theological statements. One, collective punishment down the generations of a family. The other that says no collective punishment in the generations of a family. And so what do we do with that? Sorry. Umeshanenan. So this is what the Gemara does to resolve the contradiction. La kashya. Aramaic. This is not a difficulty. This is not a kashya. In a couple weeks, we'll be reading the Arba Kashya, the Fir Kashas, the 4 questions. If you know the Yiddish term Fir Kashas, a kasha or a kashya is the Aramaic term for a difficulty or a question. La kashya, this is not actually a difficult thing to resolve. They're not as contradictory as you think they are. This, ha, meaning, as the translator helps us understand, this verse from Exodus, which states that God punishes descendants for the transgressions of their ancestors, refers to a case where they adopt the actions of their ancestors as their own. Okay? They literally grasp their ancestors' deeds into their own hands. My father was a thief, I'm going to be a thief too. It's the family business. Any of you watch Ozark? Right? So there's a lot about this in Ozark in terms of, now I'm blanking on the name of the hillbilly family that's, and like the character of Ruth, the Langmore. Langmore families are, incorrigibly criminal. And one of the main character arcs and the drivers of the drama over 4 seasons is, will Ruth Langmore, who's born into criminality, be able to become an honest person, right? And how much the legacy and the abuse of her father in particular, again, an incorrigible criminal, violent criminal, how much that holds sway over her destiny. And can you ever escape the destiny of being born into transgression and criminality? So if you haven't seen Ozark, it's on, I think, Netflix. It's a great show. It's an edge of your seat show. It's not a show to watch with the little kids at home. But great show. I enjoyed it. I guess this fall or last summer, we watched it, Kelly and I, and just tore through all 4 seasons, kind of binge watched. So the Gemara is saying, no. It literally means the sins of your ancestors will only hold you back or cause you to experience suffering if you yourself adopt them as your own. While this verse from Deuteronomy, which states that the descendants are not punished for the actions of their ancestors, refers to a case where they do not adopt the actions of their ancestors as their own. I think what's happening here is the rabbis are finding a way not to disparage or dispute scripture, because if it's the word of God, as they say it is, that's problematic. But at the same time, they really are siding with the idea of individual responsibility for transgression and not collective responsibility. There has to be a way to free yourself from the burden of transgression that your parents or ancestors may have practiced. You should not have to bear the punishment of that. And so they're saying, no, the only reason you would is if you continue in their ways or their habits. As it is stated, I visit iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the 3rd and 4th generations of my enemies. In other words, of those who spurn me. But if you follow God, you can free yourself from the burden and the awfulness of being born into a family of transgression. All right, so we're really talking about the nature of suffering, remember, and how much do the actions of those who came before us govern our fate in life, whether we prosper or suffer? You can see the rabbis really wrestling with this stuff. Steve, thoughts here?
So recalling back to the text that it was trying to add a layer onto. It said if you're good, but with the son of bad, the bad and the son of good, tzaddik bra tzaddik, and here it's like, what does it mean to adopt the ways of your ancestors, or is it just to honor them, to accept them as they were? It doesn't feel to be as easy an answer as they're suggesting, because again, it's sort of disconnected, but I'm thinking that it's really just, a stab.
Yeah, I don't have an answer, but I appreciate your open wrestling with this and kind of sharing how, what does that mean to follow in the ways of your ancestors, right? So this is how the Gemara explains the difficulty, la kashya. If you adopt the actions of your ancestors as your own, that is the thing that matters.
Yeah, and is that mean that you're acting the same way? Then how can you? Then how can, if they were bad and you are good, that you're not adopting their actions? And that's why I'm thinking that it means something else, which may simply be honoring your ancestors.
Thank you. I'm not going to try and answer that, but I do think that we have a little bit of time to keep going. So, as I just said or summarized, what the rabbis are getting at here is what the translator's gloss wants you to understand. This is, again, not in the text. It's summarizing what just came before. A righteous person is clearly not punished for the transgressions of his ancestors, right? So, Steve, yeah, if you change course, if you say, yeah, that was my dad, that was my mom, but I'm me, I have a different way in life, and I'm going to become a righteous Jew, unlike my, parents who were idolaters. Abraham and his father, right? Great example of this. Abraham's father, the idolater, Abraham says, what are you thinking? What are you doing? I smash your idols and I chart a new destiny. All right, so it is possible that Abraham is able to prosper because he is not beholden to the sinfulness of those who came before him, the pagan culture out of which an Abraham emerges. Okay. Rather, so Ella, this word here to Hebrew, gosh, I got to keep remembering not to click on the words because it makes me crazy. Okay, Ella, this word here, rather, Hachi ka'amarle, Aramaic, which means this is what he said to him. Hachi ka'amarle, this is what God said to Moses. Tzadik v'tov lo tzadik gamur. So this is a different interpretation. It's not Tzadik ben Tzadik. Remember, the original explanation is, well, if a righteous person prospers, it is because he's not only righteous himself, but he's deriving zechut avod. He's deriving the merit of what his ancestors did, and the converse of that. In this case, it's a little bit different. Tzadik v'tovlo, if you have a tzaddik and it goes well for him, tzadik gamur, he's completely righteous. That's the new explanation. Well, maybe, as they translate here, or interpolate, a person whose actions are entirely good and whose reward is entirely good, both in this world and in the world to come. Tzadik v'ralo, but if you have a righteous person and it still goes badly for him, tzadik she'eno gamor, he's obviously not completely righteous. I didn't say you had to like this. You just have to pay attention. Rasha v'tovlo, and now the converse. A wicked person where it goes well for him, Rasha she'eno gamor, he's not completely wicked, is he? He must have done something right. Rasha v'ralo, Rasha gamor. But if he is wicked, and he's punished for it, and he suffers, he must be completely wicked. Now, back to Norm Bernstein's very thoughtful objection, not an objection, but comment that this doesn't seem to jibe with what the book of Job is putting out. Exactly right. This does not jibe with what the book of Job says, because the book of Job proposes, no, Job is completely righteous. He is the paradigmatic tzaddik. He is a tzaddik gamur. in the language of the Gemara here. He's a complete tzaddik, and yet he suffers. So what do we do with this, mom and dad? Besides not like it.
Seems like a full-throated endorsement of free will.
Say more.
Because we are not somehow cast by a divine sense or, fated to become something beyond our control. It's basically saying you have the agency here in what befalls you. Whether or not you believe that is a different issue, but it's clearly postulating that you have control of your actions. And if something happened to you, good or bad, you had agency there someplace.
Nice observation. Aaron.
I actually, Doug, I kind of disagree. I don't think it's saying that nowhere does it say you're actually responsible for the things that happen to you. It says, if this happened to you, you must be responsible. There's no actual condition where you have to have earned it. It's the reverse assumption.
Thank you. Okay, so where does this go? Let's find out. Now, another technical term in Aramaic that is helpful when you're studying Gemara is fliga, ufliga de Rabbi Meir. Fliga comes from a root that means to disagree, to differ, right? So ufliga de Rabbi Meir. This disagrees with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. What's this? We're about to find out. De Amar Rabbi Meir. So according to Rabbi Meir, Shtayim natnu lo v'achat lo natnu lo. So we're now all the way back to the idea. What's the disagreement? The disagreement is over whether or not Moses' requests of God were granted. Yes, this is how Talmud functions. Sometimes you get so deep into a discussion that you forget what you were originally talking about, and the Gemara will present you with an opinion that says, and here we have a disagreement, and what's the antecedent? You got to flip all the way back. Many columns of text, or whatever the case may be, whether you're reading from Sefaria online or you have your Gemara by your side, as I do today. So what's happening here? Remember that the original claim of Rabbi Yochanan was that Moses made 3 requests of God, and God granted all 3 requests. Rabbi Meir says no, he only granted 2 requests. 2 of Moses' requests were granted to him, and 1 was not granted to him. God, and let's read all in English here. God granted him that the divine presence would rest upon Israel and not leave, and that the divine presence would not rest upon the nations of the world. But God did not reveal to Moses the ways in which he conducts the world. Back to Arlene Goldsmith's comment, right? About Job. God is not going to give the answer. You want to know why you suffer? You want to know why the wicked prosper? Not going to tell you. Right? So that is the Arlene interpretation of Job, which I clarified or corrected gently by saying, well, no, in Job, God does have an answer. You just don't like it. It's like, I'm in charge here and you're not. But in this case, it's something else. It's that Moses wanted to know, and God said, no, not for you to know at all. God did not reveal to Moses, the ways in which he conducts the world. As it is said, I will be gracious to whom I'll be gracious. In other words, not for you to know. I will decide whom I will favor. Period. In other words, in God's mercy, God bestows grace upon every person, even though he's not worthy. Now, that's a very interesting interpretation of what God is saying. Not that God is selectively gracious, but that God is universally gracious. Similarly, God says, and I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy, even though they are not worthy. So the claim that's being made here, the theological claim, is that God's universally bestows grace upon people, even those who don't deserve it, and universally bestows punishment upon people, even though they don't deserve it. I find this theologically challenging. I do appreciate the window into the way in which the rabbis seem to be turning themselves into knots to make sense of all this, and to really dig into how can it possibly be that a good person is suffering? If God is good, and God is just, and God is powerful, infinitely in each of those directions, how can a righteous person suffer? For me, they haven't successfully resolved this conundrum, but I appreciate the fact that they're in the conundrum with us. Mara Steiner, I saw your hand.
You just said what I was going to say. How can they have the righteous suffer?
Right. They haven't solved it, but they're deep in it, and we're deep in it with them. And then we have this nice little coda, which will be where we wrap things today. The Gemara continues to cite the sage's explanation of verses that require clarification on the same topic. So clearly they're not done with this yet. They're not letting go of this. This is too important. With regard to God's statement to Moses, and God said, "You cannot see my face," it was taught, for man cannot see me and live, which we looked at my dad's prompt. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha that the Holy One, blessed be God, said to Moses as follows: "When I wanted to show you my glory at the burning bush, you didn't want to see it," as it is stated, and Moses concealed his face, fearing to gaze upon God 30 chapters prior. "But now that you want to see my glory, as you said, show me your glory, I do not want to show it to you." Oh, I see. I gave you the opportunity at the burning bush the first time. You didn't want it. So now that you're asking for it, no thank you. Okay. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha interprets Moses' initial refusal to look upon God's glory negatively, right? This is not to Moses' credit, as he rebuffed God's desire to be close to him. Ufliga de Rabbi Shmuel, but this is a disagreement. Again, that word, ufliga, de Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. But this is not in accordance with what Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, that Rabbi Yonatan said, as Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yonatan said. So, what is the thing they said? Enough with the citations here. Specifically, as a reward for 3 acts of humility in averting his glance at the burning bush, Moses was privileged to experience 3 great revelations. So Shmuel bar Nachmani, in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, says, no. Moses' refusal to look upon the face of God is not a sign of Moses shying away from the divine, but rather a sign of Moses' humility. I'm not worthy of looking at your face, O God. And even goes on to say he was rewarded for that behavior because Moses concealed his face, fearing to gaze upon God. He was privileged to have God's countenance glow. He was privileged to have his own countenance glow. That's the rays of light that are misinterpreted as horns. Because Moses feared, he was privileged that they feared to approach him, meaning the people, by the way, if you're looking at Exodus chapter 34, verse 30. Aaron and Israelites saw that the skin of Moses' face was radiant, and they shrank from coming near him. So after Moses came down from the mountain, not only was his face glowing, but the other Israelites were in awe and reverence, and they stood at a distance. All right, so that's a sign of divine merit, that he's had this transformative experience where now the people realize, wow, Moses has had a George Harrison experience of God. And finally, because he did not gaze directly at God, which would have been a sign of disrespect, he was privileged to behold the likeness of the Lord, whatever that may mean. And we're going to conclude this, and then I'll take questions, because it's a fascinating, funny conclusion. So what did Moses see? Like, what was he actually seeing up there on Mount Sinai? "And I will remove my hand, and you will see my back," God's back, "but my face you will not see." Rav Chana bar Bizna said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Chasida, "The expression 'you will see my back' should be understood as follows. This teaches that the Holy One of Blessing, who, as mentioned above, wears phylacteries." Remember I told you this last week? We didn't actually look at it, but remember I said God prays? That's where we started a week ago. So what does God pray when God prays? May my attribute of mercy override my attribute of strict judgment. That's what we studied last week. So now we're all the way back to the beginning of the daf. God wears tefillin, phylacteries. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be God, who, as mentioned above, wears phylacteries, showed him the knot of the phylacteries of God's head, which is worn on the back of the head. So, and that's where I had hoped to stop today. Like, what was Moses really seeing? He was seeing the tefillin of God from behind. I have a funny story, and then we'll take some comments. Story. So, and then I have to go at 11:50, I realized. So the story is apparently, I heard this last week. It's apparently a true story of a man who was on Metro North, and he lost his tefillin. He left his tefillin behind, and he was told, well, go to the Lost and Found. There's a Lost and Found at Grand Central. I don't know if any of you have ever used it. I lost a hat once, and they didn't have it, but he goes to Lost and Found, and there's a kind lady behind the counter, but this is like a lost in translation moment. He's like, well, I lost something that's really important to me. What did you lose? I lost my tefillin. And she's looking at him like he has three heads. What are tefillin? He says, well, it's a small velvet bag. And inside the velvet bag, there are these leather boxes. And inside the leather boxes, there are these parchment scrolls, and we write on them our prayers. And then there are these leather straps, and we wrap one around our head, and we wrap the other one around the arm. And the woman is looking at him while he goes into this long explanation of what he's wearing, of what he lost. It's like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, my tefillin. And she says, what are tefillin? He says, phylacteries. And she says, oh, phylacteries, why didn't you say so? And she opens a door, and inside this locker is a sign that says, lost phylacteries. And there's bag after bag after bag of people who've left their tefillin behind on the train. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I heard this at Hadar last week. It was a riot. So, okay, yeah, that's the joke, though. What are tefillin phylacteries? What are phylacteries tefillin? Okay. Comments or questions on all of this? We've had, I think, a very deep and intense conversation about suffering and reward as measures of one's own transgression, the merit or demerit of one's ancestors, free will versus the cage into which we are born, meaning our ancestry, the dynamics and deeds of our parents and our ancestors, whether or not reward and punishment is from God at all. So there's been so many different avenues down which we have gone today and could continue to go. But I'm curious to hear some of the comments from raised hands that are up right now, and that's how we'll conclude. So Audrey, do you want to go first, please?
Of course, I can't help but wondering what happened to all those people in the Holocaust who perished. And I mean, you're being punished for your parents, you're being punished because you're bad, you're being...
Yeah. Well, I like that this last text entertains the notion that right before we got to this business about the phylacteries, right, which is kind of a funny coda to the sugya.
Right.
Don't pass quickly by the very important statement of Rabbi Meir. So there's a dispute here, the macro dispute, the biggest dispute that frames the entire conversation is between Yochanan and Meir. Moses made three requests of God. Let the Shekhinah dwell among the Jewish people, let it not dwell among the idolatrous nations, and let me know what you're really all about, God, with respect to reward and suffering. Yochanan says he granted all three requests. God actually revealed to Moses, a human being, how the universe works with respect to reward and suffering and punishment and what have you. Meir says he did not. And I think that's a very important theological claim as well, right? Yes, okay, the Shekhinah will go with the Jewish people. It will not go with the idolaters. But the request to know how God actually works.
So that basically it's Job.
It's more than Job, right? So Job, there is an answer. You just don't like the answer. In Job, God actually answers. God says, okay, you want to know how it works? Who are you to ask?
But isn't that what, if you were to ask in the Holocaust and the same thing, you'd get the same answer?
The Holocaust, I would submit, and maybe we're just in semantic subtleties here, and that's fine. I think, though, that the Holocaust, we are met with a whirlwind of silence. We are really in the, and God does not answer. As opposed to Job, who says, you don't know how my world works. I'm much bigger than you. God still asserts God's authority and power at the end of Job.
Right.
And the post-Holocaust theology has to reckon with the deafening silence of the divine.
In other words, that gave rise to the time of the death of God.
Actually, Nietzsche did 70 years before the Shoah.
Oh.
But yeah. Mom, Dad, then Aaron, then we go.
You have a moment to show off your great-grandfather's tefillin?
I do, actually. There they are. Can you see them in the corner of my office? Right here. I don't know. Can you see that? Next to the coffee maker? I'll bring them close. Yeah, found these in a lost and found closet at Grand Central. No, these are my dad
True.
very lovingly preserved these. So my great-grandfather's tefillin, his phylacteries, right? And so this is the tefillin of the yad, of the arm here, and this is the one that's worn around the head, and that's the knot of the tefillin that the rabbis are referencing. This here is what the rabbis say Moses was allowed to see.
Where did he live? Where was he?
Someplace in, probably the Pale of Settlement, emigrated.
Yeah, what is today
19th century.
Belarus? What is today Belarus?
Yeah.
But came over, I think, in 1910. Aaron?
I'm wondering if the discussion around this topic changed after the Holocaust, since you say that it's so different, that it's kind of it was the absence of God, but also to some degree suffering, the everyday suffering that, you and I experience in our jobs, like watching other people suffer on the day-to-day basis, to me, obviously is less present in most people's lives, but still over time, it's the same concept, right? It's just not 6 million at once. It's little by little every day.
Right. Will you explain what you do for a living so that comment has context?
I'm a peds critical care attending, so I take care of sick and dying children, and I watch both the children and the parents with physical and existential suffering. Actually, that's why I was late today.
Thank you for the work you were doing today and do every day. Yeah, the short answer is yeah. I mean, my friend Shai Held, who was my teacher at Hadar, says that it's really unfair to bring the Holocaust into any Jewish conversation. But of course, living when and where we do, the Holocaust enters every conversation, because the Holocaust is so extreme that it completely demolishes all of the logic that goes into pre-Holocaust thinking. In other words, yeah, but what about the Holocaust is always like, well, yeah, that's why we refer to post-Holocaust theology. It is absolutely the most shattering experience that the Jewish people have ever experienced since the destruction of the temple.
I would argue that the logic never existed in the first place.
Quite possibly the Holocaust exposes that fact.
Wow.
Yep. I wouldn't disagree. Joe Levine.
It's completely possible that your grandfather, was it your great-grandfather?
Great-grandfather, yep, Louis Klein.
And my father met at Ellis Island or on the boat over, because he also came in 1910.
Well, I love imagining that encounter, Joe. And I love contemplating, and this will be my last comment of the morning, grateful to spend it with all of you. I would love to think that some of his zechut, some of his merit as a yid, would have rubbed off on both you and on me through the merit of the ancestors. So
Amen.
Right? May we all derive a little bit of extra unmerited grace just because of who our ancestors were and the deeds they did. On that note, I'll wish you a wonderful week and wonderful weekend. We'll send around a recording of the class. Next week, we'll detour for Pesach. And then we'll hit Berakhot 5b, which is a very different window into suffering. And I think, Aaron, if you're able to be with us and you're not at your day gig, you'll find a lot of personal connection, because it's specifically about the healing of the sick.
So no meeting next Thursday, John?
No, yes, meeting next Thursday. I think no meeting on the 6th of April.
Right.
Yes, meeting on the 13th of April. So the 6th is Chag Pesach, but we are meeting on the 30th of March, 1 week from today. We're going to do a little pre-Pesach learning.
We're going to leave.
All right, my friends, take care.
Thank
Yashikar.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that's